I admit I know pretty much nothing about sports, but being a Philadelphian, I think there are a couple of teams that are doing very well right now. I heard something like that. So go Phillies, go Eagles. It's wonderful to have winning teams. But our first guest is probably very well informed about sports because he is on a show called, he's on a radio station called 97.5 The Fanatic. John Kincaid, come on up. This is hitting me in the face.
Sit here? Is that good?
Anywhere.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Having had the privilege of working across from our next guest for about 6 years, along with Jimmy Murray, on Remember When, which was on WPHT and then on WNTP, I know he is going to add a lot of fun to the conversation. Steve Ross, come on up.
Didn't finish my dessert.
We'll save it for you. Our next guest is someone a lot of us wake up to each morning on AM 990 WNTP on the Salem Radio Network. Talkers Magazine lists him as one of the 100 most important radio hosts in America, Chris Stigall. For the last 23 years, our next guest has been talking up airwaves on WVLT as host of Get Over It on Cruisin' 92 out of Vineland, New Jersey. One of the members of our board of directors, Steve Tatz. Come on up. And our MC for today
Another prop.
There you go.
is known around town for his work on WPVI, which now is 6ABC for 20 years, including hosting AM Philadelphia, Philly After Midnight, Inside Story, and Sunday Live, then as news anchor for 14 years on KYW News Radio. Wally Kennedy, come on up and take over. Yay!
Yeah, get it. I like that.
Jackie, thank you. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
First, let me just give you a 30-second resume. Started in Flint doing talk because it was a crappy disc jockey, and my boss said, you know what? Start taking calls between the records. And after 2 weeks of doing that, he said, forget the records. Stay with the calls. My talk show career was born. Honest to God, true story. It worked out very well for me. I was able to make a big jump to big radio station in Atlanta, WSB. I was down there for 5 years, and then was approached by CBS to come up to WCAU, which I decided was a good idea, and then had always wanted to do TV. I majored in it in college, but there was really nothing there for me at the station I really wanted to work for, which is Channel 6. But I became friendly with a lot of people over there. Jim O'Brien, Art Moore, people who kind of nurtured me and helped me along with my career when, in fact, something did open up at Channel 6. And then last but not least, the one thing that I did not get a chance to do prior to that time was anchor. Channel 6 saw things in very black and white terms. If you were a sports guy, you're a sports guy. If you were a news guy, you're a news guy. If you were a street reporter, you're a street reporter. And you can't knock it. They've been so terribly successful. So along comes KYW, and Steve Butler says, would you like to anchor for me? And that led to 14 of the happiest years of my life. About 2 or 3 years ago, that inner gut check that you feel that just says, okay, enough is enough. You've done everything you want to do. Time to move on. kicked in, and so I left KYW. I've been teaching college off and on for about 11 years, and that's what I'm doing now. But that's it. That's my short story. I loved doing, of my 51 years in broadcasting, 30-something were done in talk radio and talk TV. I loved every minute of it. I loved every minute of all of it. And I don't want to hog up any more time. So I'd turn to my colleagues and say, when was the last time you had a minute or a moment you just said, God, this is just great. Just let's work our way across the table.
This morning.
Did you?
Yeah. I mean, I host a daily talk show about sports. And when you wake up in the morning, and I went to bed last night at 11 o'clock, and the Phillies had just won a game like that. The Eagles are 6-0.
Yeah.
And whether I go into the Wawa or I go to the Giant or I go to church and my father's asking me after Mass, so what do you think about the Eagles this weekend? I mean, this city loves sports so much. And like you, I worked in the WSB radio family for a while down in Atlanta before coming home. I came home 2 years ago. And to get to do my job every day in my hometown, I grew up here in Delco, I'm like 4 miles from here, is the greatest blessing of my life. Okay. And to just create. I always wanted to do TV. I was like opposite of you. I studied, I wanted to be a TV guy. And then I got exposed to radio at Temple University and said, I don't want to do TV.
Sure.
TV's small. TV's the sports guy's going to get 2.5 minutes. Mm-hmm. I can get 4 hours.
It forces you to compress.
Yeah. So it's just this morning I realized how much I love it.
Steve, how about you?
Well, just this morning, I had a great moment because I awakened and I was alive. And you have to take what you can get. On a semi-serious note, if I may ask this, if anybody watched the Phillies game last night, I don't know if anybody did, but they only gave up one hit. It was in the 9th inning, and it was Alvarez walked a batter, and then it was a ground ball, which appeared to be a game-ending, short to second to first double play. And the Phillies botched it. Knowing Philadelphia and our reputation prior to this year, did anybody think, oh my God, this guy's going to come, next guy's going to come up, hit a 3-run walk-off home run, and we're just going to kill ourselves. I mean, just, that's from being a lifelong Philadelphian who lived through 1964. I was one. Anyway, as to Wally's question, and I'm glad that I'm a big fan of radio in general, and I think that one of the great things about radio is it's a theater of the mind, and it seems to have gotten lost nowadays, and that saddens me. As for the one moment, if I had to come up with one moment in my career that really stood out to me, and you're going to think this is really silly, I was a newbie in the business, and I got to work at WIBG in Philadelphia, which was Wibbage at the time. Right there, Steve Morgan, worked with him. And I was a jock at WMID in Atlantic City, and I got a call from Ed Richards, who was the program director at the time, and he says, Steve, I was on the air Sunday afternoon, Ed Richards, WIBG. And I said, yeah, hi. And he said, would you be interested in doing some weekend work at Wibbage? And of course, I nearly passed out. And I'll fast forward quickly. I started working, I did weekends at Wibbage, and I got a call from a listener. This listener would call me, and she'd call me like every time I was on, this and that. And then she said she really loved my voice, and she was going to send me money. I said, you don't have to send me money, you can just like my voice. Anyway, lo and behold, she sends me a check made out to me in the amount of $5,000. Now I'm going back to 1972. Wow. As you can imagine how much it was worth now. And so immediately I look at it, and the first thing, at different times, I got on the phone and I called, it was written on Gerard Bank, if anybody remembers that. And I called Gerard Bank and I said, I am in receipt of a check drawn on your bank, made out to me. Yes. And what's the number? And then went through all that. And what is the amount? $5,000. Oh, yes, that check is good. The check is good? That was as good as it got for me. That's my story. And then I went down to Rick Buckley, who was the owner of the station, and I said to him, what do I do? And he says, Steve, you want me to tell you what you do? He says, you rip that up, give it back, whatever, because she can say you extorted it from her or whatever else. He said, so what I would do is just forget about it. He says, you have a bright career in this business, which of course was a lie. And so I didn't do anything with that. I don't know why I brought that silly story up, but it was a moment, and I shared it with you. Chris, you're on, babe.
I've been doing it all wrong. I've been paying listeners to listen. You're getting paid to listen.
There you go.
No, honestly, I know this is going to sound like I'm pandering a little bit, but the great thrill of my career was I was born and raised in Kansas City, and I was very happy to work in Kansas City. I never dreamt that I would work in Philadelphia, and I never dreamt that I'd be doing talk radio in this city. And so when I got hired by CBS Radio to come to Philadelphia and start working in this market, for me, it was a dream come true. I never imagined being in a market this size. For some of you who came up and have always been here, maybe, I don't think you take it for granted, but I hired at WPHT. That was one of the heritage signals in the country. And so everyone in the industry knows this city, knows the heritage signals in this city. So it's truly driving into Philadelphia for the very first time to start my job here was kind of a highlight for me.
Good. Okay. Last but not least.
I'm kind of lucky. I'm at a small radio station in South Jersey, but I have the pleasure of working with directly Sally Starr, who had a weekly show at our station every Sunday, Wee Willie Weber, the juniors from Danny and the Juniors, Kenny Jeremiah, Charlie Gracie, and so many others. And it was nice just to see them like in a concert, but to work with these people and be able to have, a bite to eat and talk to them other than radio stuff and the business, that was like a big thing for me to have this opportunity to be this little station. And we're not so little. We've been written up in all kinds of honors. We've won national awards. We're the only station, I think, still around today in the Delaware Valley that plays the real oldies. We still do 50s and 60s. Even Sirius is giving it up. So we're still hanging in there. We also have talk radio. Nighttime, the switch turns, and we get to talk a little bit about ourselves. Sally Starr, I was telling Steve before, Sally Starr once told me the story, and it's so darn true. There's times I'm home. I have a lot of work to do outside of broadcasting, and I just don't feel like going in. Like 22 years it is like, man, I feel like staying home. I'm tired. Oh, I better go. It's not going to work. I get there. When that microphone goes on and the lights is on there, all of a sudden you become a different person. Sally said it happened to her all the time. I said, now I know what she was talking about. So probably the last 15 years, it's been this great moment of having to do this. Last night I had a guest calling from California, from while we were saying earlier. It's not the politics anymore that's going to get people tuning in because there's too much of it everywhere. It's the how to. How do I do this? How do I do that? Teach me something. Tell me something I didn't know. Help the people. It's the you benefit of the listeners. So we provide a great service plus entertainment. I have a very off-the-wall sense of humor. I make my general manager very nervous with some of the things I say and do and infer. But the listeners don't complain. The FCC hasn't shown up yet, so I figure I'm good for another week. How much more I'm going to do this, I don't know. I'm 78 years old, and I know it's not going to be today, but it could be tomorrow. So you got to do what you can right now, because this is a gift that we get. It's a privilege to have this situation to be on the radio or TV, and I honor it as a privilege.
Who's your best caller? All of you. What call do you just treasure?
I'm a bad one to ask because we literally craft a show when I was coming home, when I was leaving Atlanta to come back home to Philadelphia after 25 years. I talked to both sports stations and I said, I want to do a talk show without callers. And they were like, well, you can't do that in Philadelphia. And I said, but you can't, because 18 to 34-year-olds aren't really into the callers. They want more podcasty type programming. They're more into that, but you got to find the delicate balance. I like to call. I have a call screener who literally it's like getting past Alcatraz, and he makes sure that the person comes on the air, is fired up. Detractors always to the front of the line. If you disagree, you move to the front of the line. I don't care if you've been holding on for 20 minutes. Get to the front of the line if it's somebody who's interesting. And then we coach up our callers to come out firing, be ready to go. You don't have to ask him how he's doing today. Don't have to get into the small talk. Get to the business because the guy in his car wants to hear the meat of Kincaid, you're an idiot. Let me tell you why. And they want that kind of interaction.
Sure. Real quick, you're in competition with WIP.
They're all callers.
They're all callers?
They
Okay.
they do callers like 24/7. It's just the old school model of Philadelphia. And I did a network radio show. I did my own network show on ESPN Radio and then CBS Sports Radio for 16 years between the two networks. And I never took a call for the most part. Mm-hmm. And I just would create my crew around me that would be sort of like sounding boards and stuff. Mm-hmm. And they were like, wow, you didn't take a bunch of calls. I'm like, no. I said, we have a lot of good interaction amongst us. And I try to surround myself. I'm 56. And I try to surround myself with younger people. Okay. So that way they are constantly calling me out on, John, you don't understand. You don't understand. You think you know, but you don't. Like, let me explain to you about this. And I love to learn. And I think that's one of the things is every day learn. If it's not from a listener or a caller or one of your crew, surround yourself with people who are counter to the same way you grew up, different lifestyles, different backgrounds, and I think you learn a lot every day.
Okay, guys, dream caller. Steve? Dream caller.
I would say that my favorite listener are those that call that are informed and are entertaining. I don't have a better answer than that. Just
No?
we did a show. Remember when? For a lot of years, and it was not political. It was not confrontational. It was people that called up with their memories of things. A lot of times it was sports. A lot of times it was entertainment, but it were things that made them feel good, and they could look back on those times and say, "Yeah, I remember that," or that made me feel good. Or somebody would call in and say, "Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but do you remember such and such?" And then it would branch out into other callers who would say, "Yeah, so-and-so mentioned this, but I remembered it was Linton's. I went to the restaurant back in so-and-so." And those kind of callers that inspire other callers.
Chris?
Yeah, I got, in fact, just last week, I got the greatest call I think I've ever gotten from a 101-year-old World War II veteran who listens every day, and it was his birthday, 101 years old. And his neighbor called to tell me that he listens every day. And I said, is he cogent? Is he able to speak? Sharp as a tack. The guy called me back. I said, please have him call. He called. We had a lovely apolitical conversation about his 101 years and serving in the Navy as a pilot. And I choked up. I've never felt more moved in my life on the radio. Just
What'd you
listening to a
learn
man
from
talk.
him? What did he say to you? That
I just asked him. I asked him what was the secret to a long life. He said eating vegetables. He eats his vegetables.
there you
He
go.
wasn't. He didn't have a lot. He was. It wasn't that he was particularly profound, but he was just clearly of an era, right? That was just less cynical, less aggressive. Just a kind guy. His wife was 96, and she was there with him. Just lovely. It was just a different era, and it was neat to talk to.
Dream caller.
Well, I can't tell the one I liked out because it's this PG audience, so we'll go on to a different one. Believe it or not, a little different area. It was from my former program director. We were all music, and to make money, our owner, the station, decided we need to broker out some shows, whether it's music or talk, whatever. And our former program, who's Joe Patty, who's now with Temple, he did not go for this kind of talk stuff. He says, you're killing the station. We're music. What are they doing? So we had a situation where our former city council president retired, and he said he'd like to do a talk show, interviewing people in the area. Well, he showed up for 2 weeks. Week 3, the guest shows up. He doesn't. My general manager, Carl Hempel, says, can you do me a favor? Cy may not show up next Monday night. Can you sit in here just in case an interview? When I never did. Well, it's not that hard. You'll do it. Sure enough, the guy doesn't show. A guy from Cumberland County College comes in. We do the show. Okay, 2 more shows. Guest comes in. Then all of a sudden, the guest doesn't show. It's 7:01. Station ID runs and like, oh my God, there's nobody here. I can't play. What do I do now? And I did an old-fashioned Susan Bray Mad Hour, and I started doing the rant. Halfway through, there was a break. I get a call from my program director, and I won't say the word stop. Get over it. He goes, actually, you're pretty good. Get back to work. That was because Joe Patty approved of what I was doing was something he hated. He liked it so well. If you tune into my show right before, I followed Jerry Blavitt, and right before the show, there's a little drop in that goes, and ladies and gentlemen, Steve Tatch. Uh-oh, what will you do? That was a takeoff on George Benson doing those TV ads. And it plays all the time. And Joe Patty did that for me. But because he approved this strong program directors, PD said, you're doing okay. And it's actually worked now for 22 years. But it was all a mistake. But that was my best call. That my program director approved of what I was doing.
The only thing, let me just.
What does Jerry Blavitt talk about?
The only thing I
Can't
would
say.
say is, not a specific caller, I would say a generalized caller. All of us have been in the middle of a talk show, and we're on a topic we think is really good, but you kind of get the gut feeling, especially if you've been doing it for a while, we're kind of out of steam. We're kind of losing our mojo here. Then you hit the next line,
Yep.
and the next guy or the next woman just says something, same topic, but says something so different and so necessarily incendiary, but certainly thought-provoking. You literally look down and you see, whoop, dink, blink, 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 blink. They got it going again.
Yes.
They recharged your discussion. You might be able to get another 10 or 15 minutes out of it because of this person's one call. So
They veer you off a different layer of the onion.
Yeah, but I think don't you think that's the beauty of talk radio? That you really
That's the magic of talk radio.
to do talk radio, don't you have to actually know a lot about a few things rather than a little bit about a lot of things?
My favorite shows are when they go completely away from what I thought we were going to do.
I
When most
love
of the
that.
show has just
Love it.
completely veered off course.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it when that happens.
Talk radio is magic, and the magic comes out when, just as you pointed out, Wally, is you kind of get into a little lull, and you see because everybody who does a talk show looks at the phone, and they check the phone out. Are we getting activity? Why am I not getting phone calls? When you have to, sometimes you got to call an audible and change direction or do whatever. But like Wally says, one call can come in and just change the whole dynamic, which is really wonderful about what talk radio is. I can recall back when I was at WWDB 96.5, the talk station. When I was there during the you'll remember the snowstorm, the blizzard of '83,
Oh, yes.
February 11th and 12th. Yeah. And I was living in Bryn Mawr, and there was like 27 inches. It was incredible. The cars were abandoned. It was nuts. So my shift in the morning there, Saturday morning, was 5:30 a.m. till 10. And I start hoofing it because there's no way you're going to drive there. And I got to the station, and I sat down, and I did my shift. And the guy who came on after me at 10 o'clock called the hotline and said, I can't get in. And I said, okay. He said, you're going to have to hang out a while. I'll try my best. Well, his best wasn't good enough. And suddenly it was now in the afternoon. And the person who was going to come in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon called the hotline. They couldn't get in. Well, gee, ain't this fun? And for
Were
those
people
of
calling?
yeah, they were, yeah.
What were they calling about? Weren't
Well,
they digging out of a snowstorm?
No, well, you talked about whatever we talked about. The fact was, it was nobody came in. So now it got to be 6:30 at night.
Oh, my God.
I was there from 5:30.
Jerry Lewis.
Right. And if you do, anybody who's ever done a talk show can tell you the reason you don't do protracted long shifts is because it's a talk show. You're not spinning records or whatever. So I remember being on the phone with this lady, Yenta, I call her, And I'm on the phone with her. It's about 6:30 at night, and I'm now 13 hours on the air.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, here's me, leaning over the mic, and has one of these monotonous, boring voices, and she's going, and you know, Steve, when I was thinking about when that happened to me, I said, well, you know, if you're like me, and you probably are, I can tell you this. It's something like this has never happened to me before in my entire life. And she's droning on and on and on. All of a sudden, lo and behold, I nod off.
Oh no.
Oh yeah. I just totally went like this on the mic. 13 hours in the air doing talk show, right? So now, here's what I hear. Steve, Steve, are you there? And I said, I'm here. I'm hanging on to your every word.
Wow, did you ever hear Phil Hendry?
Wonderful. Yeah, I know him.
Phil
well.
Hendry is a guy who, if you love talk radio,
Yeah.
he created the syndicated show at night where he was the talk show host and he was the guest. So he created a cast of characters that were the controversial guests that would come on and stir the pot.
Yeah, he
and
rigged
he
the-
literally was on both mics.
He rigged the phone.
And he
so,
rigged the phone so he'd have conversations with himself.
That's right.
He was the ignorant right wing woman who ran the HOA.
That's right. Yeah.
He was the guy from Ted's of Beverly Hills who was the misogynist steakhouse owner in Beverly Hills who tried to turn the steakhouse into a Hooters once. And he created the cast of characters of the guest. He literally interviewed himself.
He fought with himself.
And then callers would call from around the country who didn't get the gag
Yes. Brilliant.
and would call up and be like, I can't believe this filthy person's on the air. And he's like, well, ma'am, I'm offended too. I'm offended too. And he ran this whole thing. It's brilliant
It was
theater.
inspired radio. It really
Absolutely
was.
brilliant
Yeah.
theater.
What is this doing to your business?
That's your radio.
Yep.
If you're under 28, that's your radio. And
It's
if you're
funny.
not telling people to use the app, they're not using the radio.
I agree, and I'm on an AM signal here, and there's this great discussion about what happens to AM, and AM radio is dead and it's dying, and I mean, yes, in conventional ways that's true, but we're all on this now. So AM is FM and FM is AM, and we're all. You're right. If we're not all pushing to this, then we will die.
We get at the Fanatic, we get around 30% of our listenership now is app.
Yeah.
Is it?
So
I
we're
knew-
approaching I would think within 5 years we are breaking the teeter-totter
Yep.
where more people are listening every day. We do our show every morning on television,
Yep.
on YouTube, because my whole target was to come into town and create an 18 to 34 morning show. For 18 to 34-year-old males, we go on YouTube. By the time we take our show off YouTube in the morning, we go off the air at 10 o'clock on the radio. 7 times as many people view it before the next day
I can see that.
on YouTube.
Yeah.
They watch the show.
The problem radio is dealing with is that the 18 to 34 demographic doesn't know what radio is. And the reason that is because, like, for example, I have 2 daughters. My daughters are 27 and 24. And if their dad wasn't in radio, neither one of them would have grown up. No, they wouldn't. Radio was not in their universe, not in their world.
No.
So it's kind of like, and then what you're dealing with in a world today of podcasts. There was a time in this business, if you wanted to aspire to be a radio personality of whatever the format was, you had to go through the steps. And you want to start out in a small market, and then you get better, and you move up into a bigger market. And then maybe, God willing, you wind up in a major market. But today, any schmuck with a microphone has got a podcast. Mm-hmm. And then, so the point is that, and I find that to be sad. When I got into the business, the first thing as a native Philadelphian I had to do was I had to lose my Philadelphia accent. So I said walk and talk, on and off, street.
Woulda.
Yeah, right. Water. But the point was, if I wanted to be on the radio and I wanted to be successful, I had to get rid of it. And it took a long time. Not a long time, a long time. Because I do it now. It's natural to me now. But when you're growing up as a kid and you're a native Philadelphian, and that's how you talk.
Okay.
Tuesday.
Let me ask you. You mentioned 2 or 3 times. You've mentioned your program director. How much in the present, in the way you present yourself on the air, how much are you thinking, what's he going to think, or what's she going to think?
Still do. He's not around, but the influence is always going to be there. I mean, he was brilliant. He was a hands-on guy, not nasty, but very firm, which you need to be. He wasn't there to make friends. He was there to make our station. We were called 92 First, which to me always sounded like a bank. Like 92 First doesn't sound like a radio station.
Sure.
So we, with the help of Jerry Wilkinson, actually, we changed a few things.
Well, I think everybody here knows what it's like to see the hotline blinking, and you know that it's the PD calling
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
But realistically, when it comes to your show, how much of it is you as opposed to what the station says, this is what we want you to be?
Well, it's me, and I really don't care. And the general manager, and I'm best friends with him, he knows that.
Good.
That's once I start getting censored or saying, I don't want you to act that way anymore, your demeanor, I'm out of there.
Okay.
And I'm not saying to be, nasty. It's just that I'm very different than the rest of the people on the air. I joke around a lot, I tell funny stuff, and I use not obscene language, but dirty connotation. My rule is, if little Billy, 8-year-old Billy's in the car, and he looks at Mommy, he goes, Mommy, why are you laughing? I'm okay. If Billy looks at Mommy and goes, Mommy, I don't believe he said that, I'm in trouble.
Okay. Chris, the PD?
I've been blessed to work, for the most part, with the exception of one, with program directors that appreciate the fact that, we all in this business, other than some technical formatical things, it's almost useless, in my opinion, to go back and tell a host what he or she has said. That they should have said it differently. I can't stand having conversations about the way you should have.
Let's talk about the one.
Yeah. Yeah, the one. When you micromanage, I think any of us that do that, there's got to be an element of, I have to care about this, or I can't do it well, I think, whatever that is. So I've been fortunate that I haven't really had anybody that micromanages the show too much, but there was one. I'll leave him alone. Yeah.
Wow, it might.
Back me up on this. Isn't it true, at least the last time I heard, that the only area of growth in talk radio is sports?
Yes. Sports Talk Radio has, I believe, 2.5 times as many stations as 12 years ago.
Really? That many?
As 2010 to 2022, 2.5 times as many signals.
So
Our
the
sports
first thing
radio.
when the book comes in, the first thing your PD does is going to say, okay, this is what we did, this is what WIP did.
Right.
Is
There's
it
gonna-
that black and white?
Oh, it is, and it's what are you targeting? Like, I go up against one of the most legendary men in Philadelphia radio, and Angelo Cataldi, and Angelo launched my career. And I said, when I came to town, I said, well, I'm not looking for Angelo's audience. Angelo's been on the air for 30 years. His listeners, I don't want. I want the audience. I want their sons. I said, I want every one of their sons and daughters. And so we've targeted their kids to try to get to be the next generation. So when Ange goes down to Sea Isle next year and retires and lives his life beautifully, that the younger listeners have found their new home already before my opposition tries to create something new. We've already created it for the younger listeners.
The worst kept secret in Philadelphia is that Angelo's the highest paid personality
He's
on the air.
spectacular, and he earns every penny that he
What
made.
about sports betting, which now
It's
is
huge.
taking on a life of its own? They're now stations, AM stations mostly, that just don't know what to do, what to run up their transmitter stick to get an audience, and now they're embracing sports betting because there's not many places to go.
I have 4 guys who work on my show full time. Every single one of them has a betting endorsement. And sports wagering has become a huge boom, and that's why you see so many sports radio stations. Because the money's there from these casinos and sports betting. The revenue that is generated is amazing.
Explain that.
Well,
Explain that.
I mean, I tell everybody every day a wager that I place on my BetParks app. And I talk about the fact that you can get, if you want to place a wager, it can be a free wager that if you lose, you're going to get a second chance at it by using my last name as your promo code. They bonus me on the amount of people that sign up for the app and use Kincaid as their promo code. It's amazing when I tell you, it is thousands of dollars a month in addition to what you make.
Really?
Just from one customer.
That's fascinating.
It's the biggest because the industry is printing money.
I'm so old. I worked in a radio when you couldn't read lottery.
You weren't allowed to do lines or anything, right?
You couldn't read the lottery numbers on the air.
Wow.
Oh no! Now it's bet, and more bet.
What about Pete Rose?
It's as I say to Pete, Pete was ahead of his time. I mean, nowadays he'd be an
hero.
icon. I mean, you still can't bet in Major League Baseball, and you have a player in the NFL who was suspended this year because he was using one of these apps and he was betting on NFL games. They can't control this. I went to high school with the 3 guys who fixed the NBA games that are now part of the Netflix documentary. The referee was 2 years behind me and the 2 bookies were in my class. I mean, it's when you grow up here in Delco, gosh, I used to get a parlay card for doing my chores when I was in first grade. I mean, gambling was so taboo. It was sort of this outsider thing. And nowadays, it is a boon to our industry. It's unbelievable.
Okay, non-sports guys, what will bring more people back to talk radio?
Controversy.
You believe more controversy?
It's working, isn't it? Might be wrong, but it's working.
But if everybody's doing it, doesn't that dilute the audience?
Well, then got to be people like yourselves. It's the person in the host, the person behind that microphone that's going to generate that interest.
Chris, what do you
Get the
think?
right person.
Yeah, I've always thought that at least politics in talk radio has been niche. I never had a wild idea that we would have this vast net like sports talk has. It never was, and it won't ever be. 18-year-olds are never going to listen to talk radio. They never will. They never have.
No.
So you really have to be of a certain age, in a certain income bracket, of a certain demographic to even come to talk radio. I didn't until I was, really in my 30s. So I've never really obsessed too much about young. The industry has always talked about how do we bring young people, and I always say young people don't want to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act.
No.
They just don't. It's not interesting to young people. It's interesting to older people. Yeah.
I don't know if that ship may have sailed already. I don't know if you can bring it back enough. When radio was the theater of the mind, people jumped out of windows in 1938 when Orson Welles had The War of the Worlds because they believed that aliens were attacking us and they didn't know what to do because it was so believable because they heard it on the radio, and that's what made it the theater of the mind. And the biggest component that radio has always had has been the mind. Can you get people to when they listen to the radio, they don't have a visual. They only hear words. They hear a person. And I think we've gotten away from all that. I think niche programming, we had a show on 1210, which was on, 38 states in all of Canada, and people called from all over the country because they wanted to go back in time to a better time, and to remember when. And this was something that the radio could offer. And I think radio's gotten away from that theater of the mind and niche programming. When I pitched that to PhD, it was kind of a new thing, but they went for it, and we had 12 years of success. But those days are kind of gone. I don't know what you can put on the air that will call an audience anymore. I don't know.
Okay, very quickly, let me go across the table again. All of us at one point or another are going to put our papers in and go golf or go to Tampa or do whatever. When you walk away, what do you want your legacy to be?
Known for being me. Just say it as it is, and it's not entertainment. It's how I really feel, and I do care about my audience. I'm trying to change things one person at a time.
Good. Chris?
I agree. I hope authentic. I hope it's that people trust me and know that I mean what I say when I say it.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, I think we all want authenticity. I think we want to be able to be liked by the people that listen to us and respected, and the people that hopefully we can entertain, inform, and enlighten, which is the big thing about radio. And if I could do that and make people laugh along the way, I'll take that.
Companionship. That somebody feels that My shows connected with them. They connected with me as a father, as a husband, as whatever. That there was that level of companionship and connection.
That's the greatest compliment, isn't it?
That's-
Oh, it is. When somebody will say, "I think you're the biggest idiot. I don't agree with you on anything, but I love it when you talk about your daughter.
Yes.
I love it
that's-
when you call your wife. I call my wife my bride,
Yes.
and I get emails from people and say, "Why do you call your wife your bride?" I say, "Because I was told to always think of her as that woman who was standing down the aisle coming up to see me. Because when she wants to kill you, 5 days a week, you can remember how beautiful she was and why you loved her in the first place."
I think the five of us would all agree that you've just done a beautiful job of describing not only the companionship of radio, but the beauty of radio, the intimacy.
Yes.
People don't watch the radio at home in the family room. They listen in their car. They
Yes.
listen while they're showering. They listen, while they're doing chores. They're out in the garage puttering around with the car, but they've got the radio on in the background. It's a one-on-one experience where most of us, when we got in, depending on when you got in, it was not uncommon for guys my generation, when we got in 68, 69, it was not uncommon for a guy to put up a picture of his girlfriend or his wife right by the mic.
Yeah.
So he could talk to one person.
Right.
Wally,
Reach
I-
out to one person.
I remember when I was 8. I mean, I was as young as I can remember, and my first memories were my parents getting ready for work, my dad shaving, my mom putting on her makeup, and they were laughing at this man on the radio. And I that was one of the first memories I have of thinking, I want to be that guy. And it was mornings in particular. I loved the morning, the intimacy of morning.
It is. It's
You know what it is, too? When you're the intimacy of radio is. I remember my first program director, Mark Kuhn, at WWDB. Great guy, great program director, and he told me the best advice he could give me was act as if you're only talking to one person. Forget about the multitudes. There's not thousands, millions. It doesn't matter how many are out there. But you basically talk to people like it's a one-on-one conversation, and they will embrace that. They will feel that. And if I just may, while I'm talking about Mark Kuhn and WWDB, I was a top 40 jock. That's what I aspired to be all the time, and I wanted to be. And then I was asked by a guy named Alan Mallory, who was my newsman at WZZD, which was then Wizard 100, and it was a disco station, and they were sold to the broadcasters that you now own your station. And we thought it was a bad move, of course, but we weren't exactly objective about that.
Personally,
But anyway, hold on. But what happened was, I was asked to go to a softball game that they had. The WWDB had a team, and we played somebody. Maybe it was the After SAG team. And my buddy Alan said, "Why don't you come out and and hang out with us?" So I did, and I went out there, and just me being me, and I was kibitzing and whatever. So Mark Kuhn said to me during the in between innings, he said, "Did you ever think about doing talk radio?" And I went, "Huh? What? Talk radio? You mean no records? What do I do if nobody calls?" He said, "You read the phone book." And I said, "Wow, that's pretty scary." No, I don't think that's me. He said, "I'm just going to tell you this. Just being around you as I have been, you have the kind of personality that would lend itself to talk radio, and I think you could probably be very good at it." Obviously, he was wrong. But the point was, I thought about it, and after a few days, I called him back, and I said, "Yeah, I think I want to give it a shot." And I did. And I went on the air one night, in the middle of the night, and I was god-awful bad. I was worse than, no, I would have had to work up some to be god-awful bad. That's how bad I was. So when I listened to the air check, in between throwing my guts up, I called him up, and I was apologetic, and I said, "Mark, I am so sorry. I was horrible. It was a bad idea." And he said, "Stop being so tough on yourself. You weren't so bad." I said, "Have you listened to the air check?" He said, "Yeah, it wasn't that bad." And then he gave me the greatest piece of advice, and hopefully we can all identify with this. He said, anytime you're on the air and you're thinking about going, or you don't know what to say, or there's something, you're going to fill it in with a verbal crutch, and you'll go, oh, well, it's 2:36, and I'm Steve Ross. And he said, when you think about doing that, say nothing. He said, because a pause is your friend. And an extended pause is more dramatic. It was the greatest piece of advice I ever got. And what I did was, anytime I'm on the air and I was doing a talk show and I had either a brain freeze or whatever it was, and you just say nothing. And that was the greatest single piece of advice that I ever got in talk radio.
I wish Chris had told me about morning radio. After doing afternoon drive for 25 years in Atlanta, I did not know when I came home that 4 a.m. was not too friendly.
It hurts.
But it's
It hurts.
a completely different show.
Once you get going, right?
A morning audience is completely different than an afternoon drive audience.
Yeah, it is.
It's so intimate. It is so personal, I think.
And you know what the other thing is, if I may just add this, that overnight shows, overnight jocks, not jocks, or talk show hosts or whatever, is sadly missing today. Because everybody with voice tracking and everybody's cutting back because they got to cut down on expenses and whatever else, it used to be an integral part of a great morning show was having a great lead-in, and that was the overnight show. And they've essentially disappeared.
I think these four gentlemen have done two things. Number one, we expected great stories about talk radio, but number two, as I stand here, and my career was 3/5 radio, 2/5 TV, you reminded me of the beauty of radio, of the specialness of radio, of the uniqueness of radio, and how it touches people in a way that, frankly, TV and other forms of entertainment don't. I think you've been terrific. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Can we have a round
Thank
of
you,
applause?
Wally.
Thank you, Wally.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.